We will go ahead and kick off. Good morning, everyone. This is the April 2022 Middle Mile Advisory Committee. I'm Russ Nichols. I am the chair of the committee. I want to welcome everybody to our new hybrid format. As we are coming out of the pandemic era, we are going back to in-person meetings. So we actually have a site where people can attend the meetings in person now. We have panelists in the room as well as public seating, and we will be continuing this format into the future. We will probably change locations so we have a more formal dais and setup for the meeting as things continue to develop. But thank you for the patience as we adjust our processes and the way we conduct the meeting today. We have a great deal of content that we're going to run through today. Before we do that, we'll have roll call. We'll also have an opportunity for the committee members to make some addressing comments, and then we'll move on to updates and public comment at the end of the meeting. With that, Jules, can you take roll call for us?
Good morning, Director Nichols.
Here.
President Reynolds.
Here.
Chief Deputy Director Miller.
Here.
Chief Benton.
Here.
Deputy Secretary Jiang.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Senator Mcguire. Assemblymember Quirk Silva.
Here.
Assemblymember Wood.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Before we start the meeting, a few operational matters. For everyone attending in person, we respectfully request that you both mute and turn off the speakers of any electronic devices you may have with you so we don't encounter any audio feedback interruptions. For committee members and presenters attending in person, there are microphone instructions taped to the tables. If you are not a committee member or presenter, please refrain from raising your hand until the designated public comment period at the end of the meeting to enable time for the presentations. Although for the Zoom participants, the Q&A is visible, it will not be used. And presenters, please cue Laura to advance slides. Back to you, Chair Nichols.
Thank you, Jules. And good morning again. As we jump into this, we will start out with an executive report. But before we do that, let me see if any of the committee members have comments where they would like to address the meeting. I'll start with committee members that are in person in the room. President Reynolds.
Did want to update the committee and let folks know that we at the PUC, we approved a decision on our last mile grant program yesterday. So this is the $2 billion from the legislature and the governor's package last year, SB 156. And this program will enable providers to provide grants in unserved and underserved areas. We've built in a lot of flexibility. We've also built in incentives for applicants to to come forward with the best projects possible. And we're really looking forward to getting to work to get the money out the door, to get grants in place, and also encourage local governments and tribal governments to participate. So it was a really exciting milestone in our broadband efforts, and we're very excited also to work with all of the members of the committee, all of our stakeholders as we move forward on next steps. So thank you for the opportunity to update everyone on that exciting milestone.
Thank you, President Reynolds. Chief Benton.
No, I'm just letting you know I'm sitting in for our interim director, Stephen Keck, in case folks don't know. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And sitting in for Secretary Tong today, Juan Zhang. Thank you. All right, let me transition to the members that are on our Zoom feed. Member Quirk Silva, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes, good morning to everybody. First, I want to thank the chair of the CPUC and the committee. We did hold a last mile hearing about 3 weeks ago. Some of our discussion points, I think, were listened to in the sense of some of the new information that has been put out regarding the CASIV grant. So we appreciate that. We know that the steps that are made, I think some people are going to appreciate. We know that there's others that either feel it goes too far or not far enough, but that's part of the job. I do want to say that we, as a state legislative body, had our spring recess last week, so I was able to get out to Charter Spectrum in Orange County and see their operation firsthand. Really appreciated that, as it was not only informative, but it also had me thinking about a future discussion point, not today, but perhaps in another agenda, which is for us to really delve into relating to the middle mile. How is Cpuc and the Golden Net going to be looking at sustaining the network, meaning not just once it's moved forward, but in the future? We did see firsthand the training facility at Charter and Spectrum, not only what they're doing online, but also their workforce, their call center, all of those things that go with providing internet. And we all know, for our consumers, when their internet goes down, the first thing they want to do is call somebody. So what is that going to look like as far as partners in the future, as far as not just a call center, but repairing and maintaining? So that came up pretty quickly as we were able to see all their supplies and parts and all of these things that go with providing internet service. So that would be hopefully a future agenda item. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Quirk Silva. We'll make note of that for future agenda. Member Wood. I saw a head shake there. I think that's a no. Yep, thank you. And Ms. Miller. Saw a head shake there as well. So thank you. No comments for the opening. With that, we will move on to the first item on the agenda. We'll pull up the slide deck. I'd like to introduce Mark Monroe, Deputy Director of the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative here at the Department of Technology, and have Mark do his executive address. Mark.
All right, good morning. Welcome to our first hybrid meeting here. We're excited this morning. We have, I think, an important milestone that we're going to be hearing about. As everybody's familiar, with our goal here of building out a middle mile network here that really serves all communities in California, and reaches out to the unserved and underserved. And we came forward there. This proposal was based initially on work done by the Public Utilities Commission in terms of identifying unserved and underserved communities and kind of connecting those up with state highways. This is, as I think we're all familiar with, we have some important timing constraints. We have the federal requirement that the funds be under contract within 3 years, and that the project be completed within 5. And then we also have the challenge of going from where we're at right now to having Caltrans really go through the pre-construction process and design the system. And then, of course, we'll have the challenge of trying to make sure that the $3.25 billion that was spent goes as far as possible. And so with that, we'll have to, as we get more information, we'll have to decide where we can afford to build and where we will need to lease existing infrastructure. So in terms of the initial location, our Public Utilities Commission has gone through a public proceeding and really helped provide a good tool there to really identify and clarify where the unserved and underserved communities in the state are. And Caltrans has and CDT and GSN have worked together to kind of design what that system looks like in terms of the infrastructure that's in the ground, the actual fiber. And so we're kind of in this phase now where we are identifying how to build a network, how to design a network that can function as a network that provides the resiliency and still is able to reach to reach the unserved communities throughout the state. So Golden State Net is an important partner in this project, and they bring what their experience and their years in the industry of thinking about this not just in terms of identifying unserved communities and the freeways that connect them, which was it's a good solid start, but thinking about in terms of that network lens. And so we had asked Golden State Net to put together a map that really a next layer kind of draft that assumes that the state were to build everything, and what would that look like? Which highways, which freeways would that go along? And so what Golden State Net will be presenting here is what that looks like, and kind of the methodology for approaching that. Again, it's the initial draft. It is about 8,650 miles, and it does provides that important network lens for being able to operate as a network. And so it's going to be important in terms of this will inform CDT how we can then use this as a tool to then move towards having Caltrans start pre-construction and start that clock on all of the project. And then as Caltrans does that work, it will help us understand, refine its estimates and help us understand how much we can afford to build, and then how much we'll need to lease. So after Golden State Net provides this its presentation, we will have some brief updates from Caltrans and from the Public Utilities Commission. And with that, I will turn it over to Tony Naughton at Golden State Net.
Mark, thanks very much. Tony Naughton, Chief Operating Officer of Golden State Net. I'm accompanied here today from Golden State Net by Eric Hunziker, our Vice President of Network Development, as well as Ron Hutchins, our Chief Technology Officer. I'm going to be very brief in my comments, which are just introductory, really, because the bulk of this presentation from GSN will be to review and overview the entirety of the statewide network based on recommendations we've made to the California Department of Technology. We're presenting statewide middle mile maps for network design. You'll see that we've divided the state into 5 development regions. We'll provide the overview of the topology and highlights for each such region, I should say. And this will support what we're calling an optimization process, which will be working with our partners, CDT, to take those recommendations and turn them into final decisions to be made by CDT, and where appropriate for new build construction on right-of-way, handed over to Caltrans in a timely fashion. If we can go to the next slide. Actually, the next slide is just a header slide, I believe. Design process. Sorry, this is a little different than what I was accustomed to seeing, but the design process, if we can keep moving to the next slide. Thank you. Next one after that. Great. Thank you so much. So the design process is largely a mapping exercise, as I think you all know. Recommended locations coming from the TPA are significantly anchored around CPUC recommended routes that were publicly announced quite a while back. We've engaged and continue to engage community groups and other stakeholders, as well as service providers whose input is important to this entire process. The broader recommendations for network development are really derived and based on the 18 initial projects, which are foundational to development of the rest of the network. Also very, very significant consideration of areas that are unserved from current design to build fiber routes and newly construct fiber routes wherever feasible. Obviously, cost and mileage projections are critical to this process. We have a very clearly stated budget with CDT that we're working within, so we're trying to cover as much as we can within that budget, of course. Move to the next slide, design factors. The focus here is primarily on newly constructed routes for the middle mile network. Of course, wherever feasible, we're going to try to do that. But at the same time, we've recommended dark fiber and joint builds as well in order to increase time to service in many instances, and also to make sure as many middle mile locations can be developed within the budget of $3.2 billion that Mark mentioned a moment ago. Critically important as a factor in this process to align with organizations, most of them last mile organizations that are already deeply involved in this effort. Many of them also, of course, CASA funding recipients, as well as funding from other grants. Moving on to the next slide. All of this is intended to support an optimization process, which is actually the process by which CDT will make final decisions on where network is supposed to be developed. We're going to begin this process with CDT as if 100% of the network will be newly built, and then of course work it down from there. Newly built where feasible and necessary, in instances where there may be more preferable alternatives for joint build or dark fiber solutions to comprise those segments of the middle mile network. Those will be included as well. Joint builds, by the way, are builds, newly constructed builds of fiber network with other network providers who are open access network providers themselves, where we can share the cost of newly built construction with a project that is either already underway or about to get underway, in order to save money that can be applied elsewhere in this program. There could be, of course, many questions about what I've briefly reviewed here. We're happy to take those in this session as time permits, or of course later on. I mainly want to give the bulk of our time to Eric Hunziker, who is the Vice President of Network Development, who is going to cover quite a bit of ground in about 20 plus minutes, reviewing recommended network elements and segments within the 5 regions that we've divided the state up into. Eric?
Thanks, Tony.
And
Ms. Sasaki, the next slide, please.
Eric,
Yes.
actually, let me interject here real quickly. We did have Senator Mcguire, who was able to join us. So welcome to the meeting, Senator Mcguire. I don't know if you have your camera on, Catherine, if you can enable that for him.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm unable to turn on the camera, but grateful to be with you, and good morning.
Good morning. Did you have any opening comments
Thank you
or
for joining.
questions that you wanted to use?
As Tony had noted, yes?
Hold on for just a second, Eric.
Yes, thank you.
Senator Mcguire, any opening comments for the panel?
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for that.
All right, thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Eric. Please proceed.
Oh, no, thanks. Appreciate that everyone is able to attend today, this important update. What you're seeing here is how we've kind of broken out the state. There's quite a bit of recommended mileage, and so we've kind of broke them into 5 regions. Next slide, please. So here is the current version of the recommended map or routes for the Golden State network. You'll notice that there's some changes from the previous update, because as we've been negotiating and evaluating, we're naturally stepped through an optimization process. So what you'll see here are not substantive differences from the original 18 projects, but overall a tightening and improving of the network design. Next slide, please. Go ahead and skip that one. Yes, thanks. So region 1, we'll go ahead to the next slide. This area in vastly underserved area of the state, prone to outages and fire hazards. You see here that we call out the Caltrans districts. If you could move to the next slide, please. And here we're just highlighting some of the research that the CPUC has done for unserved areas. So this includes residential and non-residential entities who are seeking improved bandwidth or bandwidth period. Some of these areas have no bandwidth at all. Next slide. This was part of the original 18 proposal. You'll see that there's a mix here of construction, identified open access networks, that is existing carrier infrastructure that we are aware could be leveraged as a partnership. I think more importantly, there's a pretty strategic opportunity here in the northwest corner in Siskiyou County and also in Humboldt County. There's some opportunities to partner with Siskiyou Tel, which we've highlighted. So it's a pretty important development in that county because it would close out the ring and provide resiliency to their existing network, which covers the entire county. In addition to that, we've identified partnerships with the two largest tribal entities in the state, the Cpuc Nation and the Yurok Nation, who have indicated their willingness to collaborate with the state, Golden State, and figure out how to provide connectivity, which is pretty important to the region because, as you can see, it creates a regional ring there. So those are some top priorities for this region. They aren't the final. If we go to the next slide. What you're seeing again was the original 18, and now we've moved on to a larger recommendation to increase connectivity along Highway 101 up through to Crescent City, as well as bifurcating some of the larger regional rings. We're well aware that in this particular view, you're seeing spurs. We'll have to work out connectivity. There are not any Caltrans right-of-ways to solve that connection, but there's a desperate need for broadband. So there might have to be some reliance on perhaps last mile collaboration, either commercial or community collaboration and wireless backhaul for those spurs. But we are aware of those. The ultimate goal is a ring topology to create resiliency and redundancy for the communities. But this represents the current phase is a large portion of the 8,650 that Mr. Monroe mentioned earlier. Could we go to the next slide, please? Here we're just overlaying some of the information that we saw previously of the unserved areas and how the Caltrans right-of-way can be leveraged to meet the needs of those communities. Please continue. Next slide. And here, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. What's of note here is that these areas, the darker lines, represent the information that the CPUC has pieced together, mapping the right-of-way from Caltrans to the underserved areas. And what we're simply showing here is that we've leveraged their research in our network design. We've closed some of the gaps to create regional rings, as you can see from the orange line, but overall, we've leveraged their efforts and research in our mapping efforts. Next slide, please. And I think this is just a cleaner version of what we would want to construct. Please continue. So I've already covered many of these, the collaboration, the tribal entities, and the potential for commercial partnerships if CDT so desires. Next slide, which I believe would be the Region 2, and we can continue on. And there's a highlight of what Region 2 might look like. Please continue. So these areas represent a really diverse subsection of the state of California. The Caltrans District 4, Oakland there, an area densely populated, but many areas, communities are economically under pressure. And so the adoption of broadband is a top priority for those communities. In a similar story on the eastern portion of this section. However, it's a very rural area, large areas of farming community, as well as people who perhaps don't have English as their native language. Continue to the next slide. So here we're showing, again, the underserved potential. You see, particularly in the urban areas, the large communities that represent a potential to connect and put in infrastructure to serve those communities. And then on the eastern portion, you see how widespread and disconnected they are from each other. So opportunities to create connectivity in those communities is very important. Continue on, please. So here was the original 18 projects, and I won't spend too much time on those because you'll see them again as we step further. Next slide. And here's the current proposed, which takes the original 18 and shows, to Mr. Monroe's point, how if we construct the entire thing, it might look. So these routes are under evaluation. You'll notice that they connect to the region to the north and to the region to the south, providing interconnectedness between the regions with the ultimate goal of connecting to telecom centers across the state to provide key connectivity. Next slide, please. And again, here, underserved areas and how those prioritized routes will serve or could potentially serve those areas. Next slide. Thank you. And then the CPUC denoted routes. Ms. Sasaki, please move on. Thank you. You can go ahead to the next one. Thanks, since time's of essence. And so densely populated areas, sparsely populated areas, mountainous regions, difficult areas to construct. These are areas where commercial entities do not build network because it doesn't have a payback opportunity to them. But broadband services is desperately needed. So this represents an opportunity to put something in place that will last for generations. Next slide, please, which I believe will go to Region 3. Thank you. So there's a highlight of how we've defined Region 3. The next slide should show the Caltrans districts. And I think we can move on. Again, the underserved areas. I think this is very similar to the story that was just north in the Stockton area. Again, rural areas, areas that really could benefit from the infrastructure effort that the CDT, the CPUC have defined for potential broadband. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the 18 original. And then let's go ahead and move to the next, and you'll see that that's overlaid by the recommended routes. These additional recommended routes of construction would again tie the areas of need together and bring sorely needed resiliency and redundancy. So instead of having isolated pockets of infrastructure, they would be interconnected as a total network topology. I want to point out that in one area in the far east there, the Death Valley Junction, very little broadband in the area. We're anticipating actually quite a bit of demand for that network from mobile carriers and partnerships. As Tony noted before, as we've been going through this process to understand the community needs, part of that is commercial viability. And I think that goes to one of the points that was made earlier about ongoing sustainability of the network. So we've already gained and garnered interest from commercial entities who are keenly interested in leveraging the network, as well as communities. Next slide. Here again, overlaying the underserved highlighted areas from the research that the CPUC has put together. And you can see how there are still areas that need to be served. The plan is that if we cannot reach that in the middle mile effort, then the opportunity to do some additional connectivity in bring the network closer to communities through last mile construction is always a possibility. Next slide. And again, this CPUC middle mile anchor map overlaid. I think we're ready to move on to Region 4. We can go ahead and skip this slide. Thank you. Just want to point out before we move on to Region 4 that again, an important tribal nation, the Tule River, was on that map. I should have highlighted that. I apologize. It was in that area. Severe socioeconomic factors are a barrier to adoption of broadband in these areas. And then, of course, one of the benefits of Caltrans construction process of undergrounding fiber is to reduce the risks against fire and other environmental hazards. Next slide, I believe, is an intro to 4. If we could move on. Thank you. Region 4 is in some ways a similar story to Region 2 as far as the Bay Area. Densely populated urban area, many folks who are under socioeconomic pressures, maybe the unbanked or folks that maybe distrust commercial entities who need access to broadband. If we could move to the next slide, please. Here's just a picture of the Caltrans districts. You'll see the greater LA area and then also Orange County. Next slide, please. And again, just reaffirming what I stated earlier, visually, you can see the unserved areas. This area has numerous carriers throughout the region, and many of them are open access carriers or have extremely competitive rates, but they're just not meeting the needs really of the constituents here in this region. Next slide, please. So here was the original 18. You'll see a mix of some middle mile open access network and CPUC recommended routes. And then in the next slide, you'll see how we tied those together. Through public comment, we've had some additional connectivity drawn into this. CDT, under the auspice of CDT and the CPUC, we will be evaluating the appropriateness of all of these routes. Very difficult area to do construction, lots of pavement, lots of federal highways, coordination between many entities, but the goal will be to close out the middle mile and reduce backhaul connectivity so that communities and fledgling wireless networks or any other type of carrier could leverage backhaul in a more sustainable business model. Next slide, please. And again, overlaying the severe need of unserved on top of the recommended middle mile routes. Next slide, please. Should be the CPUC anchor routes. Yes. If we could move on. There. So that's, again, another picture of our recommended routes. And I think we're going to be moving to the next slide. We'll see some elements that I've already spoken to, multiple carriers. Potential IRUs do exist, although construction is certainly a top priority for backhaul. And then the need for analyzing which routes we really want to take advantage of and prioritize for middle mile, to maximize the middle mile capabilities. I believe the next slide is just a highlight slide for 5. So if we could move on. Thank you. Here, yet again, another diverse region, a mix of urban and rural with sorely needed connectivity, particularly in mountainous regions. Next slide. And here's a highlight, numerous tribal nations in this area. And you can see that highlighted in the green there, a very large territory, a very large region with concentrated urban areas separated by mountains. Next slide. And numerous unserved communities, underserved and unserved. Let's move to the next slide, please, Ms. Sasaki. Thank you. The original project that we had recommended as just a point of evaluation and opportunity here represents a mix of construction, potential IRU, some joint build opportunities in collaboration with local area governments. And if we move to the next slide, I'll see, there you go, thank you. So here is just the iteration and advancement of the next phase that we'll be evaluating with CDT. And so here is, if per Mr. Monroe's original comment, what would it look like if we constructed the whole thing? I think there's great opportunity to diversify in some key areas from main carrier routes. In addition to that, there's a potential for stimulating some economic development there on the eastern shores of Salton Sea with potential lithium capacities. And then finally, but not least, that an opportunity to really create some meaningful connectivity for tribal nations throughout the region. Next slide. And here it's just a reiteration of those pieces. Next slide, please. The CPUC recommended routes. I also want to point out that one area of important diversity is inclusive of Blythe on the eastern border there. So diversifying connectivity out of that city, which is sorely needed and has been a hot topic for those folks in the Coachella Valley. Next slide, please. So there's the recommended final route. I think we can move on. So densely populated areas, tribal nations, socioeconomic factors, all of the same things that we've been discussing from north to south. In addition, there are opportunities to connect to some important telecommunication centers in San Diego, LA, and on up through the state. We have opportunities to collaborate if we want, or we can construct, which is the first priority of CDT and the CPUC. I believe that's all of my portion. Ms. Sasaki, can we move to the next slide? So there's the overall state map. And if you have questions, you can let us know. Thank you, Ms. Sasaki, for helping me.
All right. Thank you, Eric and Tony, for the presentation. Let me remind the folks that are attending the meeting virtually, we'll have a time at the end of the meeting for public comment. Several folks have typed things into the Q&A section. We will actually call on you if you raise your hand at the end, and you can ask or make your comment at the very end. At this point, let me direct to the members of the committee and see if there are questions for Tony or Eric. Nope, no one in the room. Senator Mcguire, since I can't see the folks online right now, I will call on you directly. Senator Mcguire, any questions?
Just a quick question. Thank you so much. So first and foremost, these maps are incredibly helpful on what the full build out could potentially look like. Had a quick question, and I know all of us are going to be a bit biased, and I appreciate your patience with that. Have been in conversation during the meeting with a Mendocino County supervisor, and just concerned that on the map that the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors a bit concerned in regards to seeing that Mendocino is not well served. They are not well served, but they were worried that it looked like a high served county. I just wanted to clarify that on the map, if that's all right. And that would be in Region 1.
Well, we use data from the CPUC I realize that much of that data comes from federal resources and a lot of it's in dispute. But I do believe we did propose diverse connectivity through Mendocino. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we are in an iterative process with CDT. So under the auspice of Mr. Mark Monroe and Mr. Scott Adams and Director Amy Tong, we're revising these maps and these routes on a, quite frankly, almost weekly basis to make sure that we're covering where it's appropriate.
No, absolutely. And I think the one challenge that I have on the federal maps is that if you have a few houses served, then it looks like the whole census block could be served. And especially in Mendocino, Lake, Sonoma, Del Norte County, Humboldt County, we know that we have some of the most unserved and underserved households and regions. So I think that would be the one concern that I would bring up. The last question that I have, and Mr. Hunsinger, I really appreciate your patience. So can you also talk about build out, prioritizing build out as we move forward now that we see what a potential system could look like? Talk about those next steps, please.
Yeah, thank you. Because you really hit on something that I wanted to mention in my answer a moment ago. So thank you for giving me that platform. There's two elements of our recommended design. The first is we're putting in a system which is somewhat future-proof in that instead of designing, as most carriers do, from point A to point B, we're suggesting that the state have an incredibly flexible network and allow interconnection literally every 2,500 feet while Caltrans constructs. So that means that wherever in the future any local last mile entity could connect, we want to make it available every half mile throughout the entire state. So any plans today or tomorrow will have an opportunity to connect to the network. The other thing is that there's a plan to have an incremental conduit for expansion of connectivity. And then finally, I want to mention that we're trying to keep the designs of the ring of the network topology fairly tight within 50 miles of amplification sites, and trying to keep smaller rings as much as we can. That's not always possible because of federal lands. To afford the last mile entities to connect anywhere they might want to on the network. So it's a large scale flexibility, and then also quite literally in the trench offering connectivity wherever your constituents might want to. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. And just last two comments, Mr. Hunsinger, and to the rest of the committee. One is, I think as we move along as well, would love to be able to have some coordination on if we're opening up a trench and there are power lines within that area that are in high fire threat zones, how we could potentially partner with PG&E to get those dam lines underground, since they haven't, how we can push them to do so in that trench. I would just hope that we're thinking about that, especially looking at those IOU maps that have been blessed by the Public Utilities Commission, number one. And then the last piece is Ms. Miller. I want to say thank you so much to Gail Miller. She is just a flipping all-star along with Mr. Monroe. I know they're aware of this. There is some concern, at least from the Senate working group, about the need for additional dollars on the last mile. And when I say concern, that we want to prioritize additional funding going into last mile, because we're concerned that there won't be enough in that pot at the moment, and would like to be able to get an update at our next meeting on what those thoughts are for the last mile budget. That would be super helpful for us as we move towards the budget. Thank you.
Senator.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Miller.
Yeah, and thank you to Senator Mcguire. I do think that it's an important piece on the last mile, and I think I don't know if when the PUC presents today, they'll be talking about that as well. So would just ask that we also, Senator, I don't know if you heard the president's update on the meeting yesterday. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we have at least the start of that. And then when we do the last mile update, I think it'll be important to do the loan loss reserve update too, because that'll really have a lot of influence into the last mile as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And my comment was not meant as a, any type of insult to anyone. I just think that as we move forward, I can just speak for our Senate working group that we're going to come up a bit short and need to be able to put some additional dollars into the last mile. And as times are good, I think we should put those dollars towards it, and especially for hitting the GAN limit, would qualify, I would hope, for those infrastructure funds. So just a thought and throwing that out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Other members of the committee have questions or comments? Member Wood, I see you coming off mute.
Yeah, just curious, as we start looking at the total number of miles out there, do we have and if I missed this, I apologize, I got pulled away for a second, but any idea how many miles are going to be built versus how many miles are going to be leased?
So to answer the question, that of course is what the optimization process is intended to achieve, is make those determinations of what will be newly constructed versus what will be leased, and also what could be the subject of a joint build with other open access operators. So what we're trying to do is emphasize and give priority to newly built construction in that process, and then determine what the step downs are if in fact a given locale could be more feasibly served with an alternative such as a dark fiber IRU, and really reviewing those case by case within each region. So don't have a specific answer to that question today. We've been moving forward in conjunction with Mark Monroe and Scott Adams with a basic assumption that approximately 3/4 of the entire new middle mile network development would be newly constructible. So if we take the approximate 8,600 miles times 0.75, that would be a very round answer to your good question, but we won't know the full and final answer until we've worked all the way through the optimization process. It could be more than that, it could be less than that.
So do we have any timelines on the optimization process?
Yes, we do. We are intending to work with CDT. CDT has given us a timeline where the objective is to try to complete the process by no later than June 30th, so that we can start handoffs to Caltrans on their pre-construction process. And even prior to June 30th, provide as many of those handoffs to Caltrans for newly built fiber as we can, well before the 30th. So for example, no regrets locations where no fiber the network exists today, as well as other locations we've identified in the initial 18 projects that take into account the types of considerations that are required under SB 156, and where those 18 projects are foundational to enable rings and line extensions from the core 18 foundation.
And if I could jump in there real quick to provide some clarification. So when now that we have this map, the high priority for us is really to get a statewide construction map. That was really the key part of this exercise, right? Is to be able to answer the question: if we were to build everywhere, where would that be, right? Where are all those miles that we would need to build? And so this answers that question, or provides an answer to that question. CDT will now look at this map and see if there's any route altercations we want to make, or alterations we want to make, anything we want to add, anything we want to subtract, and just kind of work with Golden State Net a bit on that in the next few weeks here. But the idea is to get that map to Caltrans to start their pre-construction work as soon as possible. So as I think we've kind of all become more familiar with, Caltrans has this pre-construction process that they need to go through. A key important part of that is going to be refining their estimated costs. So in terms of kind of when we circle back to the question of how much is going to be built versus how much is going to be leased, the initial answer to that question is it depends how much we can afford to build. And that then goes back to those getting updated cost estimates. And so I think one of the reasons we want to get Caltrans focused on the broader system and all of the potential areas that we need to build is so that we can get those estimates. And so that as we move forward in the, over the next year here, and hopefully sooner than that, we start to get those estimates, that's going to help us understand, right? And so if this map here, for example, it represents about 8,650 miles. And so let's say we add 50 miles to it, for round numbers. So we give Caltrans a map that says, hey, if we were to build this 8,700 miles, go ahead and start your process on that. As we get estimates on that, and that's going to help us understand, well, of that, what is that percentage, right? We have used, Mr. Naughton mentioned kind of the roughly the 3/4 funding level, that the $3 billion provided would cover. That assumes we would have to lease the rest. And so, but until we have updated cost estimates, it's harder to determine that. And so then, and now that we have this map, and while Caltrans is starting their pre-construction process, we can have, as Mr. Naughton mentioned, they can continue their process of identifying, all right, what infrastructure is available to lease, if to the extent that we can't afford to build in various areas. And I think that's the next step in terms of getting to that answer, is to understand how much it's going to cost to build. And then, it's simple math after that in terms of how much do we need to lease. And then as we're able to identify that, that goes back to the optimization process that Mr. Naughton was talking about in terms of determining how to stretch the money that we have as far as possible to reach all of those communities.
Okay, so I appreciate that. So it sounds like a complete map is a ways out because of the optimization process and all the interactions here. So I would just say, I guess that one of the challenges, and I'm just put an exclamation point on something that Senator Mcguire said, is that as we start looking at counties like rural counties that are really, really underserved or unserved, recognizing that the cost to get to those counties is going to be significantly higher, probably because of the remote nature of that. We just not want to forget that there are a lot of folks that are unserved, completely unserved, and hope that continues to be a high priority for this effort.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's as we look at the optimization process, as you note, there's a number of areas in the state where there is not an option for a lease. There's not an option there's no existing infrastructure. We have to build there. And so, and that's one of the advantages of getting Caltrans started on this process now, is that, we know for a lot of those areas, there's no reason to wait on starting that process, so that we can make sure that we can get it done within the federal timeframe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wood. Assemblymember Quirk Silva.
Yeah, thank you for that very robust presentation regarding the new maps, if you want to say it that way. I'm a little bit confused because we initially had the 18 maps, and now we're having the regions put, if you want to say, on top of that. So my question is, between the original 18 projects and now the new regions, do we have a priority of what area we're going to start in, like our #1 priority area? And I would concur with my colleague, Assemblymember Wood, that there are some places that, of course, don't have any connectivity. We know that's going to be more expensive, but if we don't prioritize those areas, we may well be, and you have heard me say this before, where we get moving and then we run out of funds. And if we end up, kind of doing a little bit here, there, and across the state, and don't have these first projects on the list that are underserved or unserved, I should say, then we could find ourselves having an issue. I also agree with my other colleague on, we are probably going to have more of an investment. And that is certainly something that we should think about, I think, as soon as now, knowing that there's only going to be so much expenditure before we run out, and then we may be only through half of the projects. But last I would say is on the leasing part. If we're going to be mapping out how long you can lease for and how much that's going to cost, because what happens after that? I mean, if it's a 20-year, we have to have these long-term sustainability plans. But my biggest question is, are we going to take the regions and prioritize them in order of need?
Yeah, and so what I would say to that is that we really want to get the entire network map to Caltrans, and then we can work with them on where are the as I think Mr. Naughton or Mr. Hunsinger had mentioned, where are any of the areas where we know that there's no other option, right? But we don't have, I always kind of remind people, we have now less than 3 years to get all of this under contract. And so we really need to get started on all of it. I think that, and we will be working as we give Caltrans the map that, this is if we're going to build the whole thing, this is what where it would be. We want to focus with them on where are any of those locations where we know that there's no alternative but to build, and as well as working with Caltrans and identifying where it's going to be the most costly, and as they do their work, that's going to help us prioritize further in terms of if something's going to be more time intensive versus less time intensive. I think that those are all going to be points of consideration that the CDT will be working on with Caltrans, with GSN, in terms of kind of moving forward. But I really, when we talk about prioritizing, we definitely want to get to all those areas that have no other alternative. And I think that, I want to get that map in front of Caltrans, and then we can identify those areas and make sure that we're building there. But we're going to need to be taking the same approach to rest of the state as well. And then in response to your other question about the leases, that's a concern we have as well. And we're looking at spending the one-time funding for I think when we talk about IRUs, those are standard 20 years. They can be different, but I think that's kind of a standard. That's an important question, right? Because we will need to then either extend those in another 20 years, in which case we would need to be setting aside revenues, operationally as this thing moves forward, to be able to either pay for those, or, and I think this would be the preference would be to to use some portion of the revenues that are collected over that 20-year period to then continue building. So that, if the intent is for the state to really own and operate its own system, then we want to make sure that to the extent that's possible, we build that into our assumptions on an operational basis going forward.
And if I may add to Mark's answer, our general approach in negotiation of dark fiber IRUs is to seek a right of first refusal, which could be exercisable within 12 to 24 months of the expiration of a 20-year term, typically. There will be some instances where that may not be possible, but that will be our default approach, is to try to seek rights of first refusal on those dark fiber IRUs. So we could then be talking about periods of time well beyond an initial 20-year term.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Member Quirk-Silva, for the question. Just a reminder that we do have other presentations from PUC, Caltrans, and still CDT. We are running a little behind schedule. Obviously, a lot of interest and importance in the maps that have been presented today. So I want to thank both Eric and Tony for that presentation. Immense amount of work has gone into that, the planning for that entire map, and much more to come as we move through that, obviously. With that, Mr. Monroe, did you have additional items to close out that discussion?
I think I've covered all of my talking points in this discussion, other than to say, I think everybody understands, kind of our next steps here. We want to quickly take this map and appreciate all the work GSN has put into it, and get moving forward and get to getting something to Caltrans in the weeks to come here, so that they can start their clock, their process, And then based on that, that's really going to inform how we proceed relative to ultimately where we end up building versus where we end up leasing.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. With that, we'll transition over to Mr. Rob Osborne from the Public Utilities Commission.
Good morning. I'm Robert Osborne. I'm Director of the Public Utilities Commission's Communications Division. I'm going to provide an overview of the timelines of the various last mile and broadband program work. Next slide, please. So this slide covers the public process the Commission has undertaken to implement the federal funding account since it was enacted this past July. As shown on the timeline, in August, the CPUC scoped the federal funding account into the broadband proceeding. Between October and December, the PUC drafted proposed program rules. In January this year, the U.S. Treasury released their final rule on the federal funding, and as President Reynolds said, yesterday, the PUC approved the proposed decision on program rules. Senate Bill 156 tasked the CPUC with dividing the $2 billion from the federal fund account between urban and rural counties. So $1 billion is slated to go to urban counties and $1 billion to rural counties. The decision adopts the Utility Reform Network's comparative analysis of 7 methodologies in the record. The decision also made some changes to the scoring criteria and to grant recipient obligations. Next slide, please. The broadband package tasked the CPUC with awarding $50 million in technical assistance grants to public entities and nonprofits to provide service in their communities. The funds can cover a range of costs to deploy last mile broadband infrastructure, including environmental permitting, needs assessments, and strategic plans, and also forming a joint powers authority. Eligible award amounts under ministerial review are up to $500,000 per local agency or tribal government per fiscal year. And anything above that would go to a commission resolution with a maximum amount of $1 million. On this local agency technical assistance timeline, just want to highlight a few dates. So in September, the PUC issued a staff proposal with program rules released and solicited comments and reply comments. And this was under the CASF proceeding. In January this year, the CPUC released a proposed decision, solicited comments and reply comments. And at the end of February, the CPUC adopted final program rules. We're in the middle of our outreach efforts, as you see on the red dot there. And we are planning to have a public webinar in May that we're scheduling that will hopefully be recorded so that others can watch it, not necessarily on that very date. Next slide, please. So now switching to the loan loss reserve. So briefly, the loan loss reserve has $750 million committed over 3 years. The purpose is to assist local governments and nonprofit entities to finance and build their own last mile broadband infrastructure. The loan loss reserve will provide collateral to local governments to enable better borrowing rates and terms for bonds issued to deploy infrastructure. Here are some key milestones. So in September, the PUC issued an amended scoping ruling to include development of the loan loss reserve program. In March, the PUC issued a ruling requesting comment on the loan loss reserve structure, the eligibility requirements, financing, and reporting. And a staff proposal is planned for August of this year for public comment. We're targeting the first quarter of 2023 to vote on and adopt the final program rules. Next slide, please. So in January, the PUC developed a draft program rules proposal for legacy CSF subaccounts and subaccount allocations, assigning resources to program development and implementation. A March 1st ruling proposed modifications for the public housing account, the adoption account, and the consortia account. The ruling also proposed CSF subaccount allocations and invited public comment on that proposal. On April 13th, we issued a proposed decision on the rules and funding allocations. So comments are due on May 3rd and reply comments are due on May 9th. And a scheduled vote is planned for May 19th. So once the rules are approved, the PUC plans to begin accepting applications for public housing and adoption with a July 1st due date for the public housing and The consortia are July 15th. And then for infrastructure and line extension, we are targeting Q3 and Q4 of this year. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Let me start with the committee members in the room. Any questions for Mr. Osborne? No? For the committee members that are with us remotely, Ms. Miller, any questions, comments?
No, just like, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just look forward to more information on the loan loss reserve and how we can help those local communities really be a big part of ensuring service to the areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Assemblymember Wood. Nope. Senator Mcguire. I'm not seeing your camera pop on. I'll assume the answer to that is no. Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne, for the presentation. We will now move on to Caltrans and presented by Hardeep Takar. Please proceed, Hardeep.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hardeep Takar. I work with Caltrans as the Broadband Middle Mile Network Program Director. On behalf of Caltrans, I'll be providing the progress update today. Caltrans continues to collaborate with the Department of Technology to identify viable projects to build the middle mile network within the state highway system right away, based on the maps that have been provided to date. These include the initial 18 project locations open for construction, and also the statewide California Public Utilities Commission's middle mile network map. In order to accelerate building the middle mile network, we are evaluating existing highway projects that can take on this work, which include highway projects currently in construction and highway projects to be constructed within the next 3 years. Existing highway projects that we are looking at right now are being screened to avoid and minimize impacts to environmental resources, the need for right-of-way, existing utility conflicts, and also to see if we can meet the existing project scope and schedule within the timeframes that are set to deliver the middle mile network as well, which is December 2026. To date, we have identified 74 existing projects that may be viable to add on broadband to the state highway system, within the state highway system right away. Where existing highway project opportunities are not available within the mapping that's provided by Department of Technology, Caltrans is looking into developing standalone projects that are dedicated to build the middle mile network infrastructure. Caltrans is currently focused on advancing pre-construction activities on these projects that include obtaining environmental clearances. So we've initiated studies to identify biological and cultural resource impacts. And CDT and Caltrans continue to collaborate to outreach with federal, state resource agencies and tribal governments to facilitate these consultations. The purpose of the outreach is essentially to establish early understanding of the permitting processes that will impact timelines and the delivery of projects, and find ways to collaborate to streamline and develop mitigation strategies for unavoidable impacts if they are expected to occur. We've also initiated subsurface utilities investigations, and essentially to identify existing underground utilities such as high pressure gas lines and electric lines that could be in conflict with the work that's being proposed. We're also conducting field site reviews to determine constructability, to make sure the construction means and method and the equipment needed to build a middle mile network infrastructure is feasible. And in terms of project design, we have developed plans and details for placement of conduit, vaults, and the fiber. We're also identifying the placement of conduit and walls to avoid areas where we can avoid environmentally sensitive areas and existing utilities as well. We've modified existing design and encroachment policies to accommodate the middle mile network infrastructure within the state highway system right away to provide flexibilities in the process as well. So for project locations that are more likely to have challenges with environmental clearance, permitting, and working around existing utilities, we will sequence the work at these locations with our partners to make sufficient time to address these challenges. in order to streamline the project delivery process and the associated challenges. In addition to the traditional design, bid, build, delivery method, we will be taking advantage of alternative delivery methods, which include the construction manager general contracting process, the job order contracting, and design build alternatives where they're appropriate. That should conclude my presentation. If I can open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takar. Let me start with the panel members in the room. Anyone have questions for Mr. Takar? No. And for the panel members that are with us remotely, Ms. Miller.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just on the, I do think next time from the Caltrans, I know how incredibly hard you're working, but if we could maybe just get an update on timing, that would be super helpful. And then also, I think on the environmental review, just a little bit more detail on that. And then finally, I'm going to get ahead, I hope, of Assemblymember Wood and Senator Mcguire on the dig once questions. If we could just talk a little bit about how that's all going to come together in this project, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I have to apologize, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to hop off a little bit early this morning. So I apologize for that just in about 5 minutes, but thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And for Assemblymember Quirk Silva, any questions for the panel or for Mr. Takar? Or Assemblymember Wood? And not seeing their, oh, Assemblymember Wood.
Yeah, just thank you to Ms. Miller for preempting my question.
Great minds. Thank you very much. All right, not seeing any other questions, we will move into the public comment section of our meeting. Let me ask Jules to provide the parameters for the public comment process. Jules.
Hello again. In order to allow everyone who'd like to make public comment the time to do so, we respectfully request that comments are limited to 1 person per entity and 2 minutes per person. For those on Zoom, please raise your hand to make a public comment. For those in person, please go to the designated area to do so. We will go in order of online submissions, Zoom, phone, in person, and we'll do one more round to ensure we captured everybody. There was one public comment submitted from David Griffith of Alpine County. Mr. Griffith, are you in attendance? I looked for his name and didn't see him. He had some concerns about a specific section from Arnold and Calaveras County to Markleeville and Alpine County, and we will attach his comments to the meeting recap.
Jules, he happens to be in the room.
Oh, great.
So is approaching the podium now.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see everybody, or most of you, in person, as opposed to avatars and pixels. The question I have was, I guess there's 2 questions. One is in Alpine County. Oh, sorry, I should have introduced myself. David Griffith, I'm a supervisor in Alpine County and current chair of the board. We're working hard on last mile, but can't get very far until we know where and when the middle mile will be. I know you're aware of the problem and you're working hard on it, but it's frustrating, not just for us, I'm sure for local communities everywhere. And the specific section that was mentioned from Highway 4, Highway 4, from Arnold and Calaveras County through to Bear Valley and Lake Alpine, and then on to Markleeville and Alpine County. That's one of the areas where we want to put in last mile, but if the middle mile is not going to be there, it's going to be hard to do. And it seems to sometimes be on the maps and sometimes not be on the maps, which is very frustrating. So I encourage you, as I think everybody else will too, is the sooner we can get some confirmation of where and when the middle mile will be, it'll be really helpful. And thank you all very much for all the work you're doing on this. It means a lot to unserved communities everywhere in the state, not just us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Griffith.
Mr. Neufeld, please go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate this important work and everyone's hard efforts to move it forward to better include those who are underserved and unserved, and Just want to say Fresno Coalition for Digital Inclusion is a cross-sector collaborative, submitted 2 memos on February 2nd to the respective middle mile agencies, identifying priorities for middle mile and regional exchange in Fresno County based on our local knowledge here. This included anchor institutions, county, city, Fresno Unified School District, Fresno County House of Ed, taken our local knowledge and we've provided that. We've also got evidence of underrepresentation of underserved in areas of urban poverty and multi-dwelling complexes. Note that the previous preferred scenarios by the CPUC and the CPUC maps do not reflect reality on the ground relative to the underserved and unserved. And we've got an app we built that shows how many of our students are underserved and how many people in Fresno Housing Authority complexes, for example, are underserved. Instead of less than 5,000 in Metro Fresno, it's more like 25 to 75,000. So this substantial data that's been shared with the CPUC, our concern is this: our work is informed. Well, first of all, our work is informed by current and planned builds of fiber within our region, and we want this investment that's limited to reach as much as possible. We're seeing in the maps we saw today, not attention to the information we provided that hopefully with IRUs and otherwise could reach further. So our memos are a call for a regional exchange also in Fresno, but we received no response from any of these agencies. And today's maps don't seem to acknowledge the public feedback we gave, albeit it was on February 2nd. It took a lot of local effort to gather that data, to work with ISPs, to provide that to the different agencies. So we'll be sharing that with the MMAC, but we'd want to find some way to have an audience with folks who are building out this future-proof network. We know some things about our region. For example, canals provide rights of way that can cut through areas where that will better connect potential middle mile. And if we don't properly reach areas that need the last mile with an open access middle mile, we won't have competitive, affordable services in those areas. We're doing everything we can to leverage our spend and to increase reach through all the different organizations in our region. And we would just ask that we have an audience with the CPUC and Golden State to that effect, to make sure that we're on the same page about what we have as good data and local knowledge, and that's shared and heard by Sacramento.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Mr. Williams, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Ted Williams, Supervisor for Mendocino County. I appreciate the presentations and the robust discussion. One thing that would help us at local government being good partners in this effort is some time estimates. When do we think middle mile will break ground in our county? And when do we think it'll wrap up and be ready for interconnection with the county's last mile? And I recognize the nature of these projects, the nature of government, those dates will likely change. But if you can figure out a way to give us dates sooner than later to work against, knowing that it's a moving target, I think we could be better partners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and the discussion.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next person, for those on the phone who'd like to speak, if you could please press *9 so we can see your hand raised. Ms. Lavelle, please go ahead and please correct me if I pronounce your last name incorrectly.
Hi, thank you so much. You pronounced it perfectly. Lisa Lavelle, City Council member for the City of Avalon on Catalina Island. Thank you all for the work that you're doing on this. Just wanted to say thank you for including the island and the City of Avalon on the map and looking at further investigation requiring that. I would love to help those involved connect with a couple of different parties that are currently working on undersea fiber to connect Avalon's 4,000 residents and over 1 million annual visitors with the rest of the mainland, and the ability to utilize the internet and safety discussion portions of what we need for our community correctly, and be able to have that redundancy where right now microwave is the only option here. I do also want to ask that if we could look at Caltrans considering the publicly regulated boat routes that connect the island and its residents to the mainland, as a potential to add to the Caltrans coverage map. That would be amazing. That would encompass regions 4 and 5, and also the cities of San Pedro, Long Beach, Newport Beach, and Dana Point. We're encouraged by the movement that's been taking place throughout the state on this project, and I thank all of you for your hard work in being able to allow us to provide better education, better health services, and commerce access for all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Bill Allen, President and CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, and we're the co-conveners of the LA Digital Equity Action League in Los Angeles County, one of the state's regional broadband consortia. I just want to, first of all, appreciate all the speakers and all the agencies who are working so hard to connect all of the unserved and underserved residents of this state. But I did want to note that in Los Angeles County, as was stated during the presentations, we have a number of historically disinvested and marginalized communities, and they are very concerned about the potential IRU solutions in their communities, partly because of the lack of access points when compared to the number and locations of access points that would be available in a state-built fiber network through their communities, and partly because of the uncertainty about what happens when the initial IRUs expire. So my question really for the advisory committee and the state agencies is, how can the state ensure truly equitable deployment of new fiber builds so that we don't continue to underinvest in these same communities? Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go into the next online person, Nick in the room physically, can you please prep the people who'd like to make public comments in person? And we will go ahead to Mr. Is it Takeda, or can you please correct me if I'm pronounced it incorrectly? You've muted yourself.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go. Ready. There you go.
My name is Sean Taketa McLaughlin. I'm at Access Humboldt up in Eureka. And I just want to, first of all, just thank everybody for the time, the thoughtfulness and the time you're spending to help make the process transparent and accountable. That's very important to us. And we really appreciate the elected officials and everyone else involved. I just want to make 2 quick points. One is we really appreciate the PUC's efforts to ensure an affordable floor of service in their recent discussions about how to use federal funds and having a 50-50 symmetric floor with when public funds are used to build infrastructure to the end user. We really support that. I know that's not on your agenda here, but I think we really are seeing an intelligent process that you're all going through. And I also want to acknowledge we really are encouraged by the agreement with Utopia. And we look forward to hear more about that memorandum of agreement with Utopia to help design and make sure that these connections land in communities in ways that really benefit the range of issues that we have, from public health and safety and education and community development and culture and arts and civic engagement, that are all so much impacted by the work you're doing. If we can hear anything more about the Utopia or see any documentation on that, we'd be curious. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen, please go ahead. You've muted yourself. Why don't we go ahead with Nick with the in-person people while Mr. Rosen determines how to unmute himself.
Jules, no one in the room for comment.
Okay, not sure what's going on. We've given you permission to unmute. I do want to point out that a couple people have used the Q&A function. As we mentioned, we're not using that functionality. The reason is because we want to provide the most equitable experience for those participating both online and in person. Everybody does have the opportunity to submit public comments online at any time in the Middle Mile site. If you just search California Middle Mile Initiative, the site will pop up and you'll find both how to submit online public comments at any time you like, as well as be able to sign up to get meeting notices and updates. So right now we don't have anybody else online. Is there a last call for attendees to provide public comment? I see Mr. Is it Messick? Please correct me if I'm off base with pronunciation.
Yes, that's correct. Patrick Messick from Oakland. I'll be very brief. I just want to express my gratitude to Golden State Net and the state for their ongoing collaboration to uplift the needs of our most marginalized communities in Oakland's flatlands. Here in Oakland, we are perhaps unaccustomed to such an ongoing and collaborative effort, and we're just really grateful for this participation and really hearing the voices of our communities as we strive for a future-proof resource that really meets the needs of our most marginalized. So thanks again, and we look forward to the ongoing work together.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Last call to raise your hand, online or in person? We're not seeing any, Chair Nichols.
Thank you, Jules. All right, with that, let me make one last call to the members of the committee for any closing comments. Nope. And the members online, any closing comments? All right, with that, thank you very much for joining us for this month's April 2022 Broadband Middle Mile Advisory Committee meeting. As SB 156 laid it out for us, we will continue these meetings. The next 3 meetings will be planned also as hybrid meetings, likely in a different physical location. We will be publishing that as we have the details become available. The next 3 meetings, May 20th, June 17th, and July 22nd. We invite you to join us and thank you for your participation. Unless anything changes, we will, as I mentioned, continue with that hybrid format. So thank you again for joining us. With that, we will close the meeting and see you next month at the Middle Mile Advisory. Thank you, everyone.